The mysterious arrival. The night on the alien planet was eerily quiet. The human soldier, Lieutenant David Carter, lay on his cot inside his tent, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from the long patrols and the constant tension. The distant howls of alien creatures echoed through the still air, but it was a sound he had grown used to. This wasn't Earth, but after 3 months of being stationed here, it almost felt like home. Almost. He adjusted his uniform and tried to get some sleep, but his mind wouldn't settle. The strange alien world outside, the constant threat of attack, and the feeling that something was off gnawed at him. A shiver ran down his spine as his eyes scanned the dark corners of the tent. There was a sense of unease in the air, but he couldn't quite place it. The sounds of the night began to shift. The wind rustled the tent flaps, and David thought he heard someone, moving outside. He grabbed his rifle instinctively, his heart pounding. He wasn't expecting visitors, not this deep in the woods. Slowly, he crept to the entrance of the tent, holding his breath. Was it an alien creature or a fellow soldier? Whatever it was, he wasn't taking chances. With a sudden movement, the tent flap was pulled aside, and a figure entered. David quickly raised his weapon, but the sight before him made his breath catch in his throat. A woman, an alien woman. She was tall, her skin shimmering with an iridescent glow. Her eyes, a brilliant shade of violet, locked onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. But it wasn't her appearance that froze him in place. It was the fact that she was completely naked, her body adorned with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a soft light. Her long hair, silver and flowing, framed her face like a halo. David's mouth went dry. He had never seen anything like her before. Her race, her customs, her very presence, it was all so alien to him. Yet there was something oddly familiar in the way she looked at him, as if she knew him, or perhaps knew something about him that he didn't. What are you doing?" David's voice was shaky. He wasn't sure if he should be scared, confused, or angry. The alien woman smiled slightly, but it wasn't the kind of smile David was used to seeing. It was a smile that held secrets, a smile that made his skin prickle with anticipation. She stepped closer to him, her movements graceful, almost otherworldly. "It is an alien ritual," she said softly, her voice melodic and smooth, yet it carried an authority that made David's heart race. "I come to offer you something very important to my people." David blinked in disbelief, his mind struggling to understand what she was saying. "A ritual? Why? Why are you here?" She didn't answer him directly, but instead took a step closer, her violet eyes never leaving his. Her body radiated a strange warmth, and David felt the tension in the air grow thick, almost suffocating. He felt his body tense, his instincts warning him that something wasn't right. "I am here to test you," she continued, her voice now barely a whisper. "To see if you are worthy. My people have been watching yours for a long time. We have seen your strength, your courage, your will to survive." She paused for a moment, her gaze softening. "But we have also seen your flaws, your darkness." David stood there, unsure of what to do. The soldier in him wanted to question her, to demand answers. But a part of him, the part that was tired of the constant danger, the loneliness and the fear, felt an inexplicable pull toward her. He could feel the weight of her gaze, as if it was pulling something deep within him, something he had never truly acknowledged. "Test me." His voice was thick with skepticism. "What kind of test, and why me?" The alien woman's lips parted slightly, and she took another step forward. Her presence was overwhelming, and despite himself, David felt drawn to her. She was both mesmerizing and intimidating, and he couldn't tell which emotion was stronger. "It is a test of your character, Lieutenant Carter," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "A test of your strength, your resolve, and your willingness to embrace what is unknown. What you are willing to sacrifice for the greater good." David's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt more vulnerable in his life. Was this some kind of trap? A trick? Or was this something more, something that would change everything he thought he knew about this alien world and himself? Before he could speak, the woman took another step closer, her face now only inches from his. Her breath was warm against his skin, and the scent of something unfamiliar filled his nostrils. "It's not just a test, Lieutenant," she whispered, her voice low and filled with meaning. "It is a choice, and the outcome of this choice will affect not just you, but the future of both our peoples." David could hardly breathe. He was caught in her gaze, the weight of her words pressing down on him. What did she mean? What choice was she talking about? And just as quickly as she had entered, the alien woman turned and stepped back, disappearing into the night, leaving David standing there in stunned silence. The tent was silent once more, but the tension lingered heavy and thick. David's mind raced with questions, but one thing was certain: his life, and possibly the fate of humanity, was about to change forever. The ritual unfolds. David blinked in disbelief. For a moment, he couldn't even process what he was seeing. His eyes darted from her face to the glowing symbols on her skin, then to the strange, almost hypnotic aura she seemed to exude. His grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. There was something about this situation that felt different. The woman stepped further into the tent, her bare feet making no sound on the ground, as if she were gliding instead of walking. Her movements were fluid, almost unnatural. Every step she took brought her closer, and David instinctively took a step back. The air around her seemed to pulse, alive with energy. He swallowed hard and tried to steady his racing thoughts. Who are you?" David finally managed to ask, his voice strained. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she reached out, her long fingers brushing against the air as if searching for something. Then, with a sudden, sharp motion, she placed one of her hands over her chest and closed her eyes, as if in deep concentration. Her lips moved, speaking in a language David couldn't understand, the words soft and melodic, yet with an underlying power that seemed to echo in his mind. The moment she stopped, she looked directly into his eyes, and it was as though her gaze penetrated to the very core of his being. "I am Ilara," she said in perfect, yet heavily accented English. "I come to you with an offer, a ritual, a test." David's brow furrowed, the confusion in his mind deepening. "A test? What are you talking about?" Ilara stepped closer, her body language calm and controlled, but her eyes held an intensity that made David's pulse quicken. "This is a custom of my people," she explained, her voice smooth like velvet, but carrying a weight of something ancient. "We have long awaited the arrival of one like you, an outsider, a human, but not just any human. You are special." David's heart raced at the mention of his species. "What do you mean, special?" "To us," Ilara continued, "you represent something greater than yourself, a potential we have long sought. And so, we offer you the chance to prove yourself." She paused, watching him carefully. "But this is not just a simple test. It is a ritual that will bind us, for better or worse, to each other." David's mind raced as he tried to make sense of her words. "A ritual?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "And what does that involve?" Ilara's smile was enigmatic, her lips curving slightly. "It involves trust and sacrifice." David took a step back, suddenly feeling the weight of his situation pressing in on him. He had heard rumors of alien rituals before. Some were harmless, some were deadly. But this one felt different. There was something more intense about her presence, something that felt far more dangerous than anything he had encountered on this planet. "I don't have time for games," David said, his grip tightening on his rifle again. "What do you want from me?" Ilara's eyes darkened for a brief moment before she spoke again. "You misunderstand. I do not ask for your submission, only your participation. You will choose whether to accept or reject the ritual. But know this, if you reject it, it will not go unpunished. My people, Do not take kindly to refusal." David's breath caught in his throat. Punished? By who? "By me," she answered, her voice cool, but filled with a subtle menace. "And my people will not forget your choice. They will come for you if you refuse, but if you accept, you will gain something beyond your understanding, a bond that will transcend our differences." David's mind reeled. The soldier in him was screaming to fight, to run, to escape this bizarre encounter. But there was another part of him, something deep inside, that told him he needed to understand more. There was more at play here than just some strange alien customs. There was something vital. "What exactly do you mean by a bond?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Ilara smiled, her eyes glinting in the low light. "A bond that will tie us together, body and soul. A connection so strong that not even time could sever it. You will become a part of us, as we will become a part of you." The first trial. David stood frozen, trying to make sense of the situation. The woman, Ilara, had just explained that this wasn't some random encounter. It wasn't an attack. This was a ritual. The words seemed absurd in his mind, yet the way she spoke, with such quiet certainty, made them impossible to ignore. "You don't have to do anything." "Not yet," Ilara said, as if reading his thoughts. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an undeniable force behind it. "But I warn you, if you refuse, it will be seen as an insult to my people. They will come for you, for both of us." David's heart raced as the weight of her words settled in. His instincts screamed at him to kick her out of the tent, to call for backup, to get the hell out of this mess before it escalated into something worse. But there was a strange pull in the air around them, an energy that kept him rooted to the spot. He lowered his rifle slowly, but his hands were shaking. "What kind of ritual are we talking about?" he asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Ilara smiled, though it wasn't a warm or comforting smile. It was the kind of smile you gave when you knew you had the upper hand. "A bond," she said simply. "A trial of strength and will. It will test you, not just your body, but your mind, your humanity." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning that David couldn't grasp. A trial? A bond? He had no idea what she was talking about, and every part of him screamed to flee. But something in the pit of his stomach told him that running wasn't an option. If he refused, he might be giving her and her people an excuse to do something far worse than whatever ritual she had planned. "And if I pass?" David asked, his voice more skeptical than curious. Ilara's gaze softened for a moment, though there was something unreadable in her expression. "If you pass," she said, "you will be seen as an ally. You will gain something powerful, the trust of my people. But if you fail, you'll be branded as a coward, a weakling. And my people do not forgive weakness." David's mind raced. This wasn't just some random encounter. This was a test of his very worth. But what kind of test? And what was at stake? He wasn't prepared for this kind of decision, not on a strange planet with no backup, no support. He exhaled sharply, trying to push the panic rising in his chest aside. "And what exactly am I supposed to do?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ilara moved closer, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "The ritual has begun the moment I entered your tent. Now you must decide whether you are strong enough to face it." Before he could respond, she stepped back and raised her arms, the symbols on her skin glowing brighter, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. The air seemed to thicken, and for a moment, David could swear he felt something brush against his mind, like a presence, unfamiliar and foreign, trying to push its way into his thoughts. "Close your eyes," Ilara commanded softly. "You must feel what is around you. Feel the trial begin." David hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to resist, to refuse, but there was something in her voice, something in the way she moved, that made it impossible to say no. The glow from her skin was hypnotic, and despite his better judgment, David found himself following her command. He shut his eyes, trying to focus on the sounds, the sensations around him. For a moment, nothing happened. The tent was still. The distant sounds of alien creatures outside were muted, almost as if the world had gone silent. But then slowly, David began to feel it, the shift in the air. A cold breeze washed over him, though the tent walls were still sealed. He felt a pressure building in his chest, as if the very air around him was getting thicker, heavier. It was like something unseen was wrapping itself around his mind, pressing in from all sides. His breath quickened. Was this the trial? Or was he being tricked into some kind of mind game? Focused, David, Ilara's voice broke through the chaos in his mind. This is the first test. You must overcome fear and doubt. Your mind will try to betray you. It will try to make you believe this is not real, that you should fight. But the only way forward is through. David clenched his fists, trying to ignore the pressure in his skull, the thoughts that whispered doubt in his ears. Is this some kind of psychic attack? A trap? He thought, his mind clouded with confusion. But somewhere deep inside, he felt the flicker of something else. A spark of determination. I can't fail this. I won't. He took a deep breath, and despite the overwhelming feeling of something pressing against his mind, he fought to clear his thoughts. It wasn't about strength of body, it was about strength of will. He had to prove himself. Suddenly, the pressure lifted. The strange sensation in his mind faded, leaving him gasping for air, his heart pounding. When he opened his eyes, Ilara was standing in front of him, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. You have passed a first trial, she said, her voice softer now, tinged with approval. But there is much more to come. David exhaled in relief, but the victory felt hollow. He had survived this first trial, but what else awaited him? And was it enough to prove his strength? Ilara's eyes gleamed. You've shown your strength, but now you must face what lies beyond the ritual. It is only the beginning. The trial was far from over. The trial begins. Ilara's violet eyes flashed with a glint of something ancient, something far older than David had ever known. She stepped closer, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the very atmosphere was charged with unseen forces. If you pass, she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper, you will earn the respect of my people. You will become one of us, in a way. You will be a symbol, a living proof of the strength and endurance of your species, and you will gain power beyond your understanding. David's mind raced. The weight of her words pressed down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was something far greater than a simple test or a rite of passage. This was a gamble with the fate of not just his life, but his entire species. A gamble he wasn't sure he was ready to take. And if I fail, he asked, his throat dry, heart pounding. Ilara's smile was a shadow of something darker, more enigmatic. If you fail, the ritual will be seen as an insult, and my people will do what they must to reclaim their honor. Your life will be forfeit, and worse, you will not die a hero. David shivered. The thought of dying in such a way, not even remembered for the man he was, but as a symbol of failure, was a terrifying thought. And yet, the part of him that had signed up for this mission, the part of him that thrived in the face of danger, stirred with defiance. He looked at Ilara, meeting her gaze, trying to find any sign of trickery or deceit in her eyes. But there was nothing. Just the cold, unwavering certainty of someone who had seen too much and was far too old to be swayed by fear. All right, David said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. I'll do it, but I need to know what I'm facing. What exactly is this trial? Ilara's smile softened, and for the first time she seemed almost human. She nodded, taking a step back, her expression shifting into something that could have been sympathy, or perhaps amusement. I will show you. Without another word, she turned, walking toward the back of the tent. David hesitated for a moment before following. As he moved, he glanced at the strange markings on her skin, wondering if they were some kind of clue. They glowed faintly in the low light, but whenever his eyes focused on them, they seemed to shift, like liquid light moving beneath her skin. She reached a small chest near the corner of the tent, and with a fluid motion she opened it, revealing an array of strange objects, some organic, some mechanical. There was a smooth stone that seemed to hum with energy, a twisted metal rod that shimmered like liquid silver, and a bundle of what appeared to be strange plant fibers. "This," Ilara said, picking up the stone, "is a focal point. It channels the energy of the trial. The ritual will test your willpower, your endurance, and your ability to adapt. You'll be tested not only by physical challenges but by visions, hallucinations that will force you to confront your darkest fears, your most painful memories." David's stomach twisted. Visions, hallucinations. It sounded like something straight out of a nightmare. But he wasn't going to back down now, not after agreeing to it. "You will need to focus," Ilara continued, her tone becoming more serious, "and trust yourself. The more you resist the visions, the stronger you become. The more you give in to them, the closer you come to failure." David clenched his fists, his mind already bracing for the worst. "And how do I begin?" he asked, keeping his voice steady, even though a small part of him was screaming to back out. Ilara's eyes softened, and for the briefest of moments, she looked almost compassionate. "You begin when you are ready," she said, placing the stone in his hands. It was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt before, as if it had been pulled from the heart of a frozen star. David took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the stone. The moment he did, he felt a strange pull, a tug deep inside his chest, a sensation that seemed to draw him closer to something unknown. The world around him seemed to warp, and for the briefest of moments, he thought he saw shadows moving at the edges of his vision. The air grew thick with an unfamiliar weight, and the faint buzzing of the planet's creatures seemed to grow distant, replaced by an overwhelming silence. David's heart hammered in his chest as he steeled himself for what was to come. He was ready, or at least he had to be. The trial had begun. The visions would come, and he would either survive them or fall to them. Into the unknown. The moment David spoke those words, all right, he could feel the atmosphere change. The tension that had gripped the air seemed to shift, becoming thicker, almost alive. Ilara's eyes gleamed with approval, but there was no smile this time. Her expression was serious, unreadable. Without another word, she turned and motioned for him to follow. David hesitated for just a moment, his mind still racing. This felt like a trap. He knew it. Something about this ritual didn't sit right with him. But if he backed out now, he would never know what could have been. More importantly, he wouldn't be able to face the consequences of his cowardice. His pride as a soldier, as a human, demanded that he see this through. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, following her out of the tent into the cool, alien night. Outside, the world was dark. The sky was an endless stretch of indigo, dotted with 2 moons that cast pale light over the terrain. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, a scent that seemed both foreign and familiar. The ground beneath his boots was soft, like a thick carpet of moss, and as he walked, he noticed the bioluminescent plants glowing softly in the distance, casting an eerie glow over everything. Ilara led him to a clearing in the forest, where a large, circular stone structure stood at the center. It looked ancient, older than anything David had ever seen. The stones were covered in moss and engraved with symbols that resembled the ones on Ilara's skin. The structure seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as if it were alive, waiting. Without a word, Ilara gestured for David to approach. "This is the heart of the ritual," she explained, her voice calm, but carrying a weight of authority. "Here, you'll be tested, not just by my people, but by the land itself. The forces that govern this world will judge you. Are you prepared?" David swallowed hard. Prepared for what? "The trial begins now," she replied, her tone flat, emotionless. "It will test your mind, your body, and your spirit. If you fail, you will be marked forever as weak in the eyes of my people, and you will never leave this place." David took one last glance at her, trying to decipher any hint of her true intentions. But Ilara's face was unreadable, her eyes cold and distant. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the stone circle. The moment his foot touched the center, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through his bones. He felt it in his chest, deep down to the marrow of his bones. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, as if the earth itself were awakening, sensing his presence. The symbols on the stones began to glow, casting an eerie light across the clearing. The air around him thickened, and David's breath quickened as the temperature dropped. He could hear faint whispers, voices that seemed to speak in a language he couldn't understand. But there was one word he could make out: test. It echoed in his mind, repeating over and over, until it was all he could hear. Suddenly, the earth beneath him trembled. The ground cracked open with a deafening roar, and David stumbled back, instinctively reaching for his rifle. But there was no time. From the crack in the earth, a massive figure emerged, a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body was covered in black, chitinous armor, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It towered over him, a predator born from the depths of this alien world. The creature roared, a sound that rattled his teeth, and David's heart skipped a beat. His training kicked in, and in a split second, he raised his rifle, aiming for the creature's head. But before he could pull the trigger, Ilara's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Wait. David hesitated, his finger still hovering over the trigger. Ilara stepped forward, her hands raised in a calming gesture. This is not your enemy, Lieutenant. This is your trial. David looked at her, confusion clouding his mind. What do you mean, trial? Ilara's eyes gleamed with a cold fire. To pass the ritual, you must face your fear. This creature is the manifestation of everything you fear most, the deepest part of your soul. If you can overcome it without violence, you will prove your strength. You will prove that you are worthy of the bond. The creature snarled, its glowing eyes locking onto David's. He could feel the weight of its gaze, a primal force that pressed down on him like a physical presence. His palms were sweating, and his grip tightened around his rifle. The creature took a step forward, its massive form moving with unnatural speed. The ground quaked beneath its feet. David's heart raced. This was insane. But he could feel it. The challenge, the weight of it all. This was no longer just about survival. It was about proving himself, about overcoming something far deeper than any alien threat. In that moment, David realized something. He wasn't just fighting the creature. He was fighting himself. The question was, could he win? The heart of the ritual. David stepped closer to the stone circle, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The air around him seemed to shimmer, like static electricity building up before a storm. He felt a deep, primal pull toward the stones, as if something inside him was awakening. The ground beneath his feet trembled faintly, almost as if the earth itself was breathing. Ilara stood just outside the circle, her eyes locked on him with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. This is where the trial begins, she said, her voice steady, though there was a flicker of something ancient in her gaze. The stones will test your spirit, your body, and your mind. There is no turning back once you begin. David didn't speak. Words seemed useless in this moment, and he could feel the weight of the ritual pressing down on him. His mind was filled with doubts, but something deeper, a survival instinct, perhaps, urged him forward. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he couldn't back down now. Not after everything. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the center of the circle. The instant his foot made contact with the ground, the world around him seemed to shift. The forest, the stars, even the air, everything seemed to blur, as if reality itself was being twisted and reshaped. The symbols on the stones flared with bright, glowing energy, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through his bones. David's heart raced as the ground beneath him pulsed, as if the very earth were alive. A voice, deep and echoing, filled his mind. You are not here by accident, human. It wasn't a sound that came from any one place. It felt as though the voice came from all around him, from deep within the earth, from the very core of the planet itself. "Who are you?" David gasped, his voice breaking the eerie silence. "We are the Watchers, the keepers of the ritual. We test all who seek to bond with the children of the stars," the voice responded. "You will prove your worth, or you will cease to exist as you know it. Do you accept the challenge?" David's pulse thudded in his temples. The words were like a command, not a question. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of being both insignificant and crucial at the same time. He was just one man, one human, standing alone against an alien force older than anything he had ever known. Yet somehow his humanity, his very existence, felt like it could tilt the balance of something far greater than himself. "I accept," he said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. He wasn't sure if he believed in what was happening, but he had no choice now. He had stepped into the unknown, and there was no way back. The stones around him began to glow brighter, and the hum grew louder, until it vibrated through his chest. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet, and David stumbled, his legs suddenly weak. A cold wind swept through the clearing, but there was no sign of a storm. It was as if the air itself was alive, trying to push him out. "The first trial has begun," the voice intoned, sending a chill down his spine. "Endure the trial of the body. Only those who are strong in form may continue." Before David could react, the ground beneath him cracked open, revealing a deep chasm. From the depths of the chasm, a creature emerged, its body massive, sleek, and covered in sharp, jagged armor. It was something that didn't belong to this world, a nightmare creature with 6 legs and eyes that gleamed with a blood-red light. Its claws scraped against the stone, sending sparks flying. David's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the trial of the body. The creature lunged toward him, and instinct kicked in. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its crushing claws. The creature hissed, its mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was fast, its movements fluid and terrifying, but David's training kicked in. He reached for his combat knife, the steel cold in his grip. The creature circled him, its eyes locked on him like a predator sizing up its prey. David knew he couldn't outmatch it in sheer strength or size, but he had something it didn't, his mind, his resourcefulness. He moved quickly, his feet light on the alien ground. When the creature lunged again, he ducked under its strike and slashed at its exposed side with the knife. The blade made contact with the creature's armor, but it bounced off with a shriek. David didn't stop. He had to find its weak point. There had to be one. The creature roared in frustration and charged again, this time aiming for his legs. David rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its strike, but he was losing his footing. His body was already aching from the effort, and the creature was relentless. Just as it lunged again, David spotted the opening he needed. With a quick maneuver, he grabbed a jagged stone from the ground and hurled it directly at the creature's eyes. The stone struck true, and the creature staggered back, disoriented. David didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, knife in hand, and struck where he saw the weak spot, under the creature's throat, where its armor was thinner. His blade sank deep, and the creature let out a guttural scream before collapsing to the ground, motionless. Breathing heavily, David stood over the creature's lifeless body, his heart still pounding in his chest. Sweat poured down his face, and his muscles screamed in protest, but he had done it. He had survived the first trial. The voice echoed in his mind once again. "You have passed the trial of the body, human, but there is more to come." David's legs buckled slightly, but he remained standing. The ritual was far from over. Whatever came next, he had no idea, but he was ready to face it. Because in that moment, something had changed inside him. The trial wasn't just about surviving, it was about proving something deeper. Something that would challenge everything he knew about himself and about humanity. And he wasn't backing down now. The price of power. The voice rumbled in David's mind again, its tone far more ancient than any being he had ever encountered. It was not a voice, but a presence, something vast, unknowable, and powerful. We are the keepers of the trial, the ones who test, the ones who judge. You seek power, human, but power always demands a price. David's head spun, his thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The stones around him pulsed with energy, the symbols on his body flashing in sync with the hum of the earth. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat like a drum in the silence of the night. "What do you want from me?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You must prove your worth. Your strength is not measured by your muscle alone. It is your heart, your mind, your spirit that must endure. If you are to be one of us, if you are to stand alongside Ilara and her people, you must survive the trial." Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet cracked open. David stumbled back, instinctively reaching for his rifle, but it was useless here. The energy in the air was so thick, so overwhelming, that it seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. He could feel the heat rising from the cracks, the ground trembling beneath him, as if the planet itself was alive, angry. Out of the fissures in the earth, shadowy figures began to emerge. Dark, monstrous shapes that defied logic, their forms shifting and changing, appearing as a mix of human and alien, twisted by the power of the trial. They were terrifying, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, their forms hovering unnaturally above the ground. David's breath caught in his throat. He instinctively tightened his grip on his rifle, but he knew this wasn't a battle he could win with weapons. This was a fight for his very soul. Fight them, human. Prove that you have the strength to survive. Prove that you are worthy of what lies ahead. The shadowy figures advanced on him, their eyes fixed on him with cold, calculating intent. David's pulse hammered in his ears as the first creature lunged at him, claws slashing through the air. He ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack, and came up on his feet in a defensive stance. The figures surrounded him, closing in from all directions. His heart raced, every muscle in his body screaming for him to run, to escape, but he knew that there was nowhere to run. This was it. This was the test. The moment where everything he had ever believed in, everything he had ever been, would either break or make him stronger. With a roar, David charged forward, ducking under another swipe of claws and kicking one of the creatures in the chest. It stumbled back, but then, as if it were made of smoke, it reformed, its shape twisting into something even more horrifying. A second figure lunged at his side, slamming into him with the force of a freight train. He hit the ground hard, the air rushing from his lungs, but he fought to stay conscious. His rifle lay discarded several feet away, useless in this strange, supernatural trial. There was no weapon he could use here, no tool that could fight the creatures of the trial. He was alone, with only his strength and will to survive. Just as one of the creatures lunged at him, David's mind flashed back to his training, to everything he had been taught about never giving up, never surrendering. He rolled to the side, grabbing the creature's arm and twisting it in a maneuver that sent it crashing to the ground. But as it collapsed, it dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the earth as though it had never existed. One down, dozens more to go. But with each passing second, David felt the strength drain from him. His body was battered, his mind beginning to fracture under the pressure of the trial. But there was one thing he knew: he couldn't stop. Not now. As the last creature closed in, David let out a primal yell, a surge of defiance filling his chest. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater than himself, for humanity's place among the stars, for the chance to stand beside beings who had seen millennia of history, who had power beyond imagining. In that moment, David wasn't just a soldier. He was humanity's hope, standing alone against the darkness. With a final, desperate move, he managed to slam the creature into the ground, watching as it dissolved into the earth. And as it did, the world around him seemed to settle. The energy in the air calmed, the hum of the stones fading into silence. David collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his body bruised and bloodied. But his eyes were wide open, his spirit unbroken. He had passed the trial. He had survived. Ilara stepped forward, her expression unreadable as she surveyed him, the sweat and dirt covering his face. "You did it," she said quietly, almost as if in awe. "You survived." David, breathing heavily, looked up at her. "And now? What happens now?" Ilara's eyes softened, the hardness that had marked her before now replaced with a strange respect. "Now, you are one of us. You have earned your place among the stars." David didn't fully understand what that meant yet, but in the silence that followed, he realized something. The trial had not just been about survival. It had been about proving something deeper, about showing that humanity, despite all its flaws, had the strength to endure. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were ready for whatever came next.